we had talked about Chesa Boudin, I don't know, a month or two ago. We ran one of his ads, which was very, very powerful. And
son of Weather Underground activists, right?
Yes, raised by Bill Ayers, I can't remember his name now. But he is one of those people who are on the West Coast, I guess California or in San Francisco, as in Seattle, they have ballots, early voting ballots that are counted after Election Day. Mm-hmm. And so it looked like he had lost, just like Shama Swant. And it turns out he won. There are now, off the top of my head, Krasner in Philadelphia is one of these reformist DAs. Boudin's going to be another one. This is a legit movement. There's a couple others, I think, around the country. Off the top of my head, can't come up with them. But here he is on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman.
The onslaught of attacks all came in about a 10-day period, and the police union spent in that 10 days of attacks pretty much the same amount as my campaign spent over the entire year. So it was a tremendously impactful last-minute onslaught. But you're right that it's hard to say what the impact was. Certainly, there were many, many voters who rejected the attacks. And I think it speaks to the ways in which the leadership of the police union is really disconnected from the values of San Francisco voters. The attacks backfired both because they were dishonest and racist, but also because voters simply didn't want that kind of interference or tone in local politics. And so, it's hard to say specifically whether I won more or less votes because of the attacks, but what is clear is voters rejected the attacks and saw through them. I think, going forward, we have to be mindful of the fact that the police union leadership has been on the wrong side of so many issues and so many races for years in San Francisco politics. There's a real disconnect, as I said. But my job isn't to hold grudges, isn't to attack back, but rather to roll up my sleeves, sit down at the table with everybody who's willing to talk, and be willing to listen to them so we can rebuild the trust between our communities and the law enforcement that's supposed to serve and protect those communities. If you look at the protests, if you look in the eyes of the parents of Alex Nieto and Mario Woods and other people who've been killed by police violence in San Francisco, it is clear that we have a tremendous amount of work to do to rebuild that trust, and I'm committed to doing it with everybody at the table.
Cool.
Absolutely, just fantastic, right? That's I don't know how you could get any better than that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for his ability to sort of obviously not hold a grudge from a campaign, but also to say, look, we have to go in and negotiate with these people and be able to articulate that police unions, and this is not unique to San Francisco at all by any stretch, are on the wrong side of a lot of these questions. Right. But know that he's a DA. He's got to work with them and to go in like an adult and approach it that way. Mm-hmm. That's exciting.
Do you think the police unions will ever be on the right side of any of these questions, though?
Well,
I think it's incremental.
I don't know. But I do think that to the extent that you have a DA who can articulate that they're on the wrong side, it is, I think, at least indicative or gives me hope that the relationship is not going to be one of catering to the wrong side, but one that's going to try and hold them to account. And I think at one point, I don't know that they're going to be on the right side, but I think that they could be a little bit more neutral and a little bit less powerful. Every ex-cop that we've ever had IM into this show to talk about the failures of policing and particularly in terms of violence on Black people has said the problem is that the DAs are not holding them to account. And someone who has the ability to come out and say that the police union's on the wrong side of this, I think is going to be able to provide at least some accounting to the police force and change their behavior.
And in major cities, they're steamrolling the mayors. I mean, look at New York right now.
Yep.
It's a perfect example. And the complexity of New York, just you have to look at each of these cities and how they're structured. I mean, we have 5 boroughs. We have DAs in each borough. We have one major police force that the mayor spearheads. And, that's negotiating. That's 5 different negotiation tables that you're having. Whereas in San Francisco, it's structured different, of course, the electoral system, same thing with Philadelphia. I mean, what was, I think, really sad about Tiffany Caban was Queens, as much as we think Queens has all these progressive wins, it's really just Northwest Queens. And that was a very strange race where there were several candidates in that race that gave Tiffany an opening. But, there's a lot of work to be done here electorally in around the country, in Manhattan. And, I mean, we have a race that's possibly going to happen in Manhattan very soon, in 2 years. But it really is case by case, and you have to think these things through as movements, as understanding the dynamics of the areas where you're running. And San Francisco's a perfect place for someone like him to be running, and it's amazing that he was able to pull this off, and it was that close in San Francisco. Or the fact that, maybe it was a little bit early in the movement cycle, and that's why Larry Krasner was able to break through.
Right.
Because now they're alert and they're cracking down. I mean, they literally had to fix the election for Tiffany Caban to lose, but again, that was a race where there were several candidates, there were several conservatives that canceled each other out, and Queens is Trump won Queens. Like, let's just be real here. Or did very well in Queens, I should say. In parts of Queens, he won, like my neighborhood, but it's also where Bernie Sanders won. So we have a lot of work to do. I don't think we're going to have this change overnight, is essentially what I'm saying.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would be really impressed if one of these progressive DAs called to shrink the budget for their own department, because like a drawing down of police presence in cities is so important in order to ensure the safety of low-income people and Black and brown
But
units.
that's not their budget.
The
That's
DA's budget is different from the police
exactly.
budget. I mean, the
right.
DA...
Well, will they call to shrink the police budget?
I mean, it's...
Will they call to shrink the carceral state? Like, I think
I think
issues...
these reformist DAs... I don't know if they're calling explicitly to, but I mean, I think he has. I don't know if he said those exact words, but certainly in the ad that we talked about, he said that there is, we over imprison people and that we need to find other solutions. I mean, I think he ran on that. I don't know if he said we need a smaller police budget, but
just like the idea that there could be such a thing as progressive policing in this country. I'm very skeptical and cynical about it. I think we need less policing and more alternate modes of dealing with interpersonal harm in communities. And these things have been tried out already and found to be
I think that's what he ran.
I think he's aware of all
We're still
this.
figuring out if there can be a link between these progressive prosecutors and a more abolitionist framework that a lot of these grassroots groups like No New Jails are working with.
I think the abolitionist framework is great, but we also have to keep in mind that in major cities around the country, it's not just a police force, it is a national security force, which is what we're seeing with the ICE raids. I mean, they're working hand in hand with the federal government right now, the military literally. So you're not just fighting community, it's like community policing is almost comical in New York. I mean, the charade that we're running around thinking we can reform the police department in New York and institute these reforms, you're dealing with the military right now. You're dealing with Trump using the NYPD to swoop up churro ladies as a form of ICE. I mean, there's such subtleties in the law that they're exercising, using the loopholes.
You can't reform the Gestapo.
That's essentially, I mean, this is what's freaking me out. You saw in Queens and Ridgewood, right on the border of Brooklyn, this weekend, you had an ICE militarized vehicle operated by the NYPD go through that neighborhood. That's not
insane.
The police force. That is not reforming in a progressive. I mean, I don't know how the DA handles that. That's the Attorney General.
Right.
Well, I think we'll see as these movements continue. Like, I don't have all the answers. I'm happy to be in a group like DSA that has people working on electoral reforms and people working within a much more radical framework and working with grassroots groups outside of DSA. So we'll see.